Story 1. Prizes in cereal boxes are now either a boring puzzle on the side of the box or a QR code you scan for a scam mobile game. Story 2. I spent my days outside. I would pretend the trees were shelter for my baby dolls during a rainstorm. I would slide down hills onto ponds in the winter. I would climb pine trees until they started to sway and smell the minty sap on my hands. I would run along old hunting trails until I reached a nearby farmer's field just to see the vast expanse of open sky. I would pick wild blackberries and raspberries in big buckets and then eat half of them on my bike ride home. I was always outside experiencing nature without distraction. This was not even that long ago, about 15 years ago. I remember adults making kids these days comments back then. It is a much more technologically immersive world now. Story 3. Playing freely in the streets is something my children will never understand. They went out from morning until evening, only coming home to eat. Story 4. The terror you feel when you accidentally tap the internet button on your phone. Story 5. Riding bikes all day, using the sun to tell time. Cable television with those older commercials. Toys R Us. On demand on Comcast. Story 6. Freedom. I had lots of unstructured free time, roaming all over the neighborhood while my parents did not know where I was. Nowadays, if someone sees a child on the bus alone, they call 911 to report an abandoned or lost child. I am pretty sure there was a case of a mother being arrested for letting her children play unsupervised in a park across the street from her house. For goodness sake, let kids have some freedom. I flew alone on an airplane from Ontario to British Columbia when I was 6 years old. The flight attendants watched me, but still, no parents, no older siblings, no babysitter. Story 7. Those big round spinning things at playgrounds are called roundabouts on Wikipedia, but there are many different names. We spun them so fast that kids would fly off. I can see why they are not allowed in playgrounds anymore, but they were a lot of fun. Story 8. Parents are unable to contact you for 80% of the day. Story 9. Being able to go out and have genuine fun without worrying that someone is recording it to post on social media. Story 10. Freedom. I feel we were always left to our own devices as children. Nowadays, every second of their lives is planned and scheduled. Story 11. Walking to your friend's house just to ask whether he wants to hang out. Story 12. Video stores. As much as streaming almost any movie or television show is convenient, going to the video store on a Friday or Saturday night to choose movies to rent for the night or the week was the best. A big part of it was the anticipation of not knowing what would be available. Children today will never experience that, sadly. Story 13. When photos are taken for a special occasion, you have to wait a week or more to get them back, only to find 26 pictures of your mom's pinky. Making up stupid games in your head because you are bored and have nothing to entertain you. Queuing at a box office to get tickets for a gig. Meeting people on holiday and communicating by letter. Story 14. When it comes to real-life adventure, most kids these days enjoy technology more. Cannot blame them. Story 15. I woke up from a nap after school around 11 p.m. and heard all my friends in a lowrider laughing out loud. Story 16. Having to plug electronics into those large televisions using the yellow, white, and red connections. Story 17. I would wait for a boy to call, sitting in the hallway or on the kitchen floor for a long time. I used to put my feet up on the wall and stare at the ceiling, spending half my time twirling the telephone cord and the other half trying to straighten it out. Story 18. Trick-or-treating has died off, and it makes me so sad. It was a blast back in the day. Story 19. I had ankle bruises from razor scooters. I would disappear all day in the woods by my house and come back for dinner. I went grocery shopping and had to hold the paper coupons the whole time without losing them. Story 20. Unsupervised and unmonitored time. Most children in Western countries seem to go straight from being supervised around the clock by parents, teachers, childminders, activity coordinators, and coaches to having a phone that is tracked and monitored in every way. I am not arguing for unmonitored phone access. In the past, childhood included a point when you began walking to school or other places alone. You began making your own plans, taking responsibility for your commitments, and experienced times when no adult saw or heard every little thing you did. I was born in the mid-1980s. From the time I was 9 or 10, I walked to places alone or with friends. I played unsupervised in the garden, in my room, in the fields, and with neighborhood children. If I was going somewhere, I had to tell my parents exactly where I was going, with whom, and when I would be back. Then I was expected to be safe, behave sensibly, and keep my commitments. My parents were former police officers and very cautious. I had less freedom and autonomy than most of my peers. It is sad that modern children have lost that. That independence is how you build confidence, earn trust, learn to navigate the world, and cope with the unexpected. It must be very hard to step into adulthood and confidently make your way when you have rarely been allowed to act independently, without constant supervision and monitoring. No wonder children are so anxious today. It is hard to be confident you can cope with what life throws at you when you are never given the chance to face some of it alone. Story 21. Snow days were special. Every winter I eagerly awaited the blessed phone call or an email saying that school was canceled for the day. I would put on my snow pants, coat and boots and tumble around in the snow for hours until my fingertips went numb and my lips turned blue. Then I would go inside for hot chocolate and spend the rest of the day playing video games. Now, with remote learning, the snow day is a thing of the past. Story 22. People used to camp out for midnight releases, especially at GameStop. I was too poor, but I heard stories from the more fortunate kids. Story 23. Waiting for my mom to get off the phone so I could use the internet. Story 24. Use your imagination to avoid being bored. Go out and build dens, but be home before the streetlights come on. Story 25. Having to be in the house at a certain time to watch a specific program because that was the only time it aired. Also sitting down with your parents to watch Saturday night television. Story 26. A life free of the heavy burden of social media and of being constantly connected was the best. Story 27. How to figure things out, disconnect, and make mistakes without them being recorded and used against you for life. Story 28. Riding a bike around town, seeing all your friends' bikes together, and popping into their homes to hang out with them. Story 29. Boredom without access to a screen to entertain you. Story 30. Using the streetlights turning on as a signal to go home. Story 31. You haven't lived until you've played a 4-way Pokemon battle with an octopus cable connecting 4 Game Boy systems. Story 32. Saturday morning cartoons were the first lesson in, if you snooze, you lose. Story 33. Laughing out loud. My childhood in Southeast Asia included writing with the kind of pen that you have to dip in ink. Story 34. You could not send or receive pictures by text because your phone was not compatible. You had to tell people to stop texting you so you would not run out of messages before the end of the month. You used the school's office landline to call the home landline and hoped someone would pick up because you had vomited and needed a ride. Story 35. Knocking on my friend's door and asking their parents if they can come out and play. Story 36. I am going to the library to look up information for my classes using an encyclopedia. Story 37. People in your house are listening in on your phone calls using another phone. Story 38. My sister and I would wander around our neighborhood, at least when it was cool enough. Either the one where we have lived for the past 11 years has almost 0 children, or they are all inside all the time. Story 39. I experienced high levels of secondhand smoke exposure. I remember sitting behind my father while he smoked in the car. He usually cracked the window, but the airflow was still foul. I had severe asthma as a child. None of my children have asthma. They have mostly had access to clean air. Story 40. Weekend drama on TV. Early morning cricket with friends on Saturdays and Sundays. The joy when Dad buys a small toffee. The delight of reading a letter from my uncle and granny. Story 41. Fear. So much has changed to protect children that they rarely experience any danger. Do not get me wrong. A lot has changed for the better, but we have gone too far in not allowing children to push themselves to experiment with slightly dangerous behavior. Story 42. Sneaking out at night to smoke tea bags in the forest with Drifter Dan, an occasional visitor to our neighborhood. Story 43. There was no technology in my day. The television only had 2 channels and was black and white. Batteries were for torches only. Laugh out loud. Story 44. We waited all year to see television specials like The Grinch, The Wizard of Oz, and Disney films. If you missed them, you had to wait until next year to see them. Story 45. Honeybees are everywhere. Fall and winter have been cold, with few record-breaking high temperatures. Story 46. Staring out of the window, listening to the birds without any distractions, just daydreaming and doing nothing. Story 47. Violent playground games such as Red Rover, dodgeball, being thrown off a merry-go-round, or being hit in the face with a tetherball. Story 48. I had the ability to log off and not be bothered again until I logged back in. I did not have social media to this degree in my youth. We had Zanga, MySpace, and early Facebook, but Instagram was not a thing. With MySpace, you eventually logged off for the night. AOL Instant Messenger was not part of your phone either. Internet on your phone was expensive to use and so on. I wish I could go back to that. Story 49. Playing outside all day without phones or handheld computers. Story 50. Dial-up internet. You cannot use the phone and the internet at the same time. Having only a landline is very rare these days. Story 51. Playing outside until it is dark without any parents nearby. Story 52. When we were bored, there was no television on demand, and cell phones and tablets were not everywhere. We had to wait for certain days, like Thank God It's Friday, for our favorite shows, and we had slow, boring dial-up internet. I think it taught us patience. I feel old. Story 53. Running to the bathroom to urinate during the 5-minute commercial break in a television movie. Story 54. Screen-free time. When I was young, I would go days without looking at a television. Children today see screens almost non-stop. Story 55. Bored channel surfing. Not that I miss that, but it is weird to think that kids nowadays do not really know the feeling of sitting there watching a show you hate because you are homesick. It is noon on a Tuesday, so all the channels you like are basically filling time with old reruns during typical school hours. Story 56. Waiting in line overnight outside record stores for concert tickets. Story 57. Walking home from school unsupervised with 3 or 4 neighbors. The dog days of summer. Not having a cell phone. Story 58. We could go outside without being watched. My mom slapped a walkie-talkie in my hand and sent my siblings and me out the door. We could only go as far as the walkie-talkie range, but that was still a couple of blocks. I could even walk to elementary school with it, then lock it in my locker after telling my mom I had made it. Kids definitely can't do that anymore. Have you seen all the moms getting in trouble for abandoning their kids? Story 59. Snow days have changed. Computers that students brought home were already appearing before the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, but when the lockdown forced students to learn from home, snow days stopped meaning much. When heavy snow falls in my hometown, students simply log on to their computers and join virtual classes. I remember watching the television in the morning when I was younger, hoping for a day off so I would not have to do homework, but those days are gone. Story 60. Dial-up internet made parents angry because it clogged the phone line. Story 61. I do not know how common this is these days, and it is likely because of where I lived, but I generally do not see children playing in the neighborhood or on the streets with little or no supervision. Story 62. Getting angry when you try to record a song on the radio and the disc jockey talks over it. Story 63. I remember spending more time outside as a child without the fear of getting lost or hurt. When I was a kid, we would run around and just have fun. There was some parental supervision, but most of the time my parents did not really care what I was up to. Once, a friend and I went out barefoot in our school uniforms. It started raining heavily while we were still outside, and we got lost running around the woods near my house. We found our way back, of course, and my mum was furious. We had been gone for at least an hour. She did not know we had left because we had not told her. When we returned, we had to wash our feet because they were covered in dirt. Story 64. Collecting cans and bottles, bringing them to the store to redeem the deposit, then riding your bicycle, a bicycle motocross, to the arcade to spend your earnings. Honorable mention goes to being timed by Grandpa to see how fast you can ride to the store and back to get him a pack of cigarettes. Story 65, raw dogging, shitting. Now we can use phones while we release the unholy ghost into the toilet. Story 66. Making friends meant riding bikes on the street in front of the neighbor kid's house. Story 67. Kids used to go on wild adventures in the woods or elsewhere. Now they just stay home and maybe go to the mall. Story 68. Not knowing the weather. I lived in the northeastern United States. My dad was our family's weather guy, and he would say generic descriptions in the morning before we left for school. It's going to be cold today. Story 69. Ask your friends at school what happened in the episode of their favorite show that aired yesterday. Story 70. It is time to idle and be bored enough to get creative. If smartphones were something to eat, drink, or smoke, they would be illegal for a long time. Story 71. We fought with siblings and parents over whose turn it was to use the house phone in the evening. We stretched the phone cord down the hall and sat inside the bathroom doorway for privacy while talking to a friend or partner. Story 72. It was simply being able to walk out the door to play or explore anywhere. Everything was fine as long as you came home for meals. Story 73. We spent time in person with friends often, not just occasionally, because we did not have constant access to them through technology. I had to be in the computer room to use instant messaging, or I had to spend 5 minutes typing a text on my flip phone. It was easier to meet in person, to talk and do things together. Social lives were much richer back then. I am all for the technology we have now, but it has negative aspects. I do not think children today have as rich a social life as adults did in the past. Fewer memories are likely to be made behind a screen. Story 74. Riding around the neighborhood to find the pile of bikes at the house where everyone was that day. Story 75. Obtaining classmates' numbers from the student phone book and making prank phone calls to other students. Story 76. I cover the red on our television so my older sister cannot switch the channel. I am an original Cartoon Network fan, and she is a Nick Jr. fan. Story 77. Ring the house phone and ask to speak to your friend to arrange a meeting. Story 78. Walking a mile into town unsupervised. Those were the days. Story 79. I'm going to a friend's house to ask if they can come out to play. Story 80. Dial a phone number to hear the time of day. Story 81. Mumps and chickenpox were common childhood illnesses in the 1980s. I got chickenpox a bit later at 13 in 1990, and it was awful. I am so glad my children did not have to experience it. Story 82. Having to dial into the internet at 28 kilobits per second and lose the connection if you receive a phone call. Story 83. Digging with chips out of your knees after jumping off the swing at the playground. Story 84. Going outside to hang out with the neighbors, usually playing downball. Story 85. Dial-up internet meant waiting for whoever was on the landline phone to get off, so you could use the internet. It was always a tug of war over who needed it most in my household. I was laughing my ass off. Let's just say it didn't get many weeknight breaks. Story 86. Meeting and playing with other kids on the same street whose names you'll probably never know. Story 87. Being able to run free in the neighborhood and be home when the streetlights come on. Story 88. Going home to make or receive a phone call, or simply using a phone. Story 89. She angrily slammed the phone down into its cradle. Story 90. Not being reachable by your parents, or not being able to reach them when you were outside, meant you had to be careful and know when to go home. Story 91. Regular meetups and trips to the park and the play area at McDonald's. Story 92. Walking to school is rare now. Few children do it. Story 93. Buying music based on word of mouth or because of a cool album cover. Traveling far to an independent record store to find new music. Story 94. Standing for 15 minutes in front of someone's home and waiting for them to come out was part of hanging out. Now it is considered stalking. Walking alone to and from school as a child used to be normal. Now children either get a ride or their parents drive them, and if not, someone would call Child Protective Services. Story 95. Go outside at 8 in the morning and do not come home until 6 in the evening. Do not send text messages or make phone calls. Do not get arrested or die, and be home in time for dinner. Story 96. I miss actually good music videos. I do not know a single person who watches them anymore. They are not as fun and creative as they used to be. Story 97. Playing outside until the streetlights come on. Listening to good music, having face-to-face conversations, and video games that do not constantly upsell. Story 98. You planned to meet somewhere without cell phones. If they did not show up, you had no idea what had happened to them. Story 99. Getting an ass-whooping when you don't listen, complain, or do something wrong. When you refuse to go outside. When you are rude, or when you don't respect your elders. Story 100. Downtime and freedom. I was a free-range kid. Today, children have schedules as packed as company executives. Story 101. Getting stuck on a video game and having to put it down because there is no way to look up the solution. You can have an adult try to figure it out, but if they cannot, you are both stuck. Story 102. We went outside after homework and did not come back home until the streetlights came on. No one knew where we were. We were not always instantly available by cell phone or text. I am so grateful to have had that freedom, and it makes me sad that kids today do not really get to experience it. Story 103. Cartoons created solely to sell toys. Story 104. Dragging the phone cord around the house while on the phone. Story 105. Having to deal with restaurants filled with cigarette smoke. Story 106. This is a little gross, but I used to be so invested in playing with my dolls that I brought them into the bathroom to continue playing while I used the bathroom. I am not old. I am in my early 20s, and I am thankful to have been raised in a way that encouraged my mind to be active and to take initiative. Now, with younger members of Generation Z and Generation Alpha, that natural sense of fun stemming from children's limitless imagination has been replaced by passive doom scrolling on digital screens. There is a big emphasis on the passive aspect. When children grow up dependent on screens, it becomes harder for them to develop individuality and personality, at least in my view. Story 107. All of these answers. Running around outside until dark with no threat of abduction. Story 108. Answering the landline and not knowing who the caller was on the other end. Story 109. Wandering off into the woods or some unknown place for an adventure without your parents or anyone else's knowledge. Story 110. Going out to play, coming back for dinner or when it's dark. Story 111. Connecting rabbit ears to the television and attaching a small wire adapter to the ultra-high frequency antenna screws for the video cassette recorder. Story 112. When I was little, most people did not yet have smartphones. They had basic mobile phones that could only make calls and send text messages. Some could play very simple games. Very few had extra features such as cameras. Story 113. To be honest, boredom shaped me. I grew up constantly bored, and it is what made me a good artist. I had to figure out how to occupy myself, so I started drawing in my school notebook. Boredom can be distressing when you do not know how to deal with it, and I feel like a lot of kids today are disadvantaged because of that. They always have stimulation, at least most of them. Story 114. I had no way to check in with my parents. Sometimes I would be gone all day, biking around with friends. I just had to be home before dark. Story 115. Calling someone's home and speaking with their parent before you could talk to them. Story 116. Clean water. Litter-free hiking. Playing outside and riding bikes until sunset. Snow days. Story 117. Movies on the video home system. Recording over tapes you did not like with films that aired on television once a year. Story 118. Neighborhood kids gather outdoors after supper to play hard before being called in for bed. Red Rover, red light, green light, and kickball. Story 119. Given all the crazy things we used to do when we were kids, I would have to say near-death experiences. Story 120. Being out of contact with your parents without mobile phones or trackers, and simply telling them you are going to the shops and will be back later. Story 121. This may have more to do with growing up in a small town and now living in a large city than with changes over time. I fully agree this is far too unsafe where I live because of the amount of pedestrian and vehicle traffic. When I was younger, we had almost complete freedom to run and play in the neighborhood as long as we did not cross certain boundaries and watched for cars. Story 122. Kids' websites like Neopets, Club Penguin, and Pop Tropica were great. I missed them. Story 123. We built dens and went there to hang out and play, not knowing who would show up because we didn't have phones to call, and we stayed out until the streetlights came on, then had about a minute to get home before getting into trouble. Story 124. Life before the internet and cell phones. My parents telling me to come home when the streetlights came on, drinking water from the hose, shops closed at a certain time, being sent to the shops with money and a list, then coming home safely. Our parents knew where we were when we were not at home. Story 125. I'm under the impression that hitting your kids isn't normal anymore. Growing up on the military base, we all got hit. We could look over at Leonard, and things did not seem so bad. Leonard's dad choked him a lot. Story 126. Dressing up. I am one of 8 children. My mother dressed us properly for church. We wore starched shirts, ties, and slacks. My sisters wore dresses, skirts, and blouses with nylons or stockings. We all knew how to iron and polish our shoes. She dressed us for weddings, funerals, and family functions. Jeans, or dungarees as she called them, were our play clothes and not for going out. Story 127. Just going outside to play. I hardly see that these days. Story 128. The smokers' alley across from the junior high school. Riding in cars without seatbelts. Early cell phone plans with night and weekend minutes and limited text messages. Story 129. Go out to play with whatever friends you find when you get there. Story 130. Frogs used to be a common sight on rainy days when I was a kid. Now I cannot remember the last time I saw a frog outside pet stores. Story 131. You run from the kitchen to the living room the moment you hear the commercial end because you cannot pause your television show and you need to catch up on the details quickly. Story 132. We spent the day with other children in the neighborhood and returned at dinner time. We had a separate kid world and had to develop socially without adults. Adults were available if needed, but children did not run to their parents and developed better social skills. Story 133. I could do almost anything I wanted on any computer because the older generation had no idea how to use them. I remember when I was in elementary school, they replaced the card catalog with a computer in the library, and I brought floppy disks to install games on it. Instead of being angry, the librarians were impressed. Nowadays, if a kid did that, they would probably face major disciplinary action. Story 134. Finding a stash of pornography while wandering through the woods. Story 135. Being unable to contact others or be contacted frequently was an issue. Road trips also required more work. Story 136. There was a lack of social media. The closest equivalent was MySpace, and I was already a teenager. Story 137. Holiday traditions are being changed because some people want to be more inclusive and remove older, fun customs. Story 138. Being told that all you need to make caramel is to melt sugar in a pan, and having no internet to verify it, you plop a pan on the stove to try. Turns into a sticky mess. You try to pour it onto wax paper, but the sugar sticks to itself. The wax paper gets too close to a flame and catches fire, so you run for a fire extinguisher and put the fire out. Now you have 4 hours before a parent comes home. Plenty of time to hide the evidence and remove the burnt sugar from the pan. You have been home alone all day during the summer. Story 139. They are actually playing outside. Honestly, they are on devices 24 hours a day now. Story 140. Smoke was everywhere. I remember taking a transatlantic flight with my parents in the early 1980s. People casually smoked on airplanes, in bathrooms, at McDonald's, and in the subway. Everything was brown and smelled terrible. Kids today have no idea. Story 141. Measles, mumps, chickenpox. A neighbor's child died of meningitis. Story 142. Playing on the playground at a park with a group of random kids. Parks are always empty. Story 143. Photos, the physical kind, not the gallery kind you will never open again. Story 144. calling someone and hearing a busy signal, making a collect call to your home as a signal that you are ready to be picked up. Story 145. Go outside and play in the yard or at the playground. Kids nowadays do not know what fun is like. Story 146. Really early access to drugs and alcohol? Many people praised the unsupervised time, and it did have benefits. But it also meant there was a lot of time to fill. Not many kids today got to experience going to that one man's house just outside of town who would buy you beer, the man over 21 who still hung out with high school kids. You and a couple of friends knocked on a random trailer because a friend's older brother said you could buy weed, then smoked with a stranger while a toddler walked around the living room. Story 147. Calling my parents from the landline to ask for a ride and hoping they are home. Story 148. My mother often had friends over with their children. We would go to the beach and have picnics. They had large family birthday parties to which everyone was invited. When I was growing up, we had company several times a week. Now, as a working mother, I am so busy with work that I have little time to see friends. We get the children together maybe twice a year. Story 149. Learning telephone etiquette involves politely asking to speak to your friend when someone else answers the phone. Story 150. I enjoy live concerts without looking through a phone screen. When I was young, we did not have camera phones and cameras were practically banned at events. We danced, sang, and watched the show. Now everyone holds their phones up, recording every second, which takes away the experience of being in the moment. I tried using my camera once to record a show and, to be honest, who watches those recordings afterward? The quality is terrible and I did not enjoy the show as much as I do when I am not staring at a screen. All those phones held in the air block the view for everyone, and there is no longer room for a good mosh pit. I miss a proper mosh pit. Story 151. Playing outside all day with my friends with no phones. Story 152. We were untethered from a cell phone and had a degree of independence. After school, we went outside and were not seen again until the streetlights came on. That was the signal to go home, and it was fine. Story 153. Eating at a restaurant without staring at a phone or iPad the entire time. Story 154. Buying alcohol and cigarettes for your mother using a handwritten note that says she gave permission, then reusing the note with two friends to get drunk when you were 10 years old. Story 155. Digging holes in the woods or prairie. As a child, I grew up in a subdivision that had once been a cornfield and was still surrounded by old fields and patches of woods. My friends and I would hike to a secluded patch of prairie and dig holes as deep as we could before hitting the water table. We made a few tunnels connecting them, but then realized we had no support and abandoned the idea. The holes eventually turned that patch of prairie into a small grove of willow trees because they collected a lot of water. Story 156. Stubbing your big toe while wearing rubber flip-flops. Story 157. If you missed a show live on television, you were out of luck unless they decided to play a repeat. You could try to record it, but you would also record everything before and after, and the tape could run out. Story 158. I walked to school uphill in the snow both ways. Get off my lawn. Story 159. Riding in the back seat of a car without a seatbelt. Having a shotgun and a rifle in the back of the truck you drove to school in high school. Leaving campus for lunch in high school. Schools without fences or gates. Teachers coming to your house to check on you when you were sick. Doctors making house calls for sick children. Neighbors knowing you and your family and getting together from time to time. Being able to get away with something because there was no photographic or video evidence. Story 160. Tying dolls to the bag and pretending they were parachutes, laughing out loud. Story 161. Teachers said and did harmful things to students. Yes, it still happens, but not as often as it used to. It used to be very common for teachers to be cruel. Story 162. Talking to someone on the phone without asking where they are. Story 163. I had an actual childhood. The 90s were simple. The early 2000s were a great time to be a teenager. It is just different now. Even my children wish they were my age back when I was living the basic dream. Story 164. Standing in line in the school cafeteria to get immunizations. Story 165. Playing outside, riding bikes without motors, telephones with cords, and being nice. Kids today are so entitled and snotty, at least in my area. A bunch of little fucks. Story 166. A rotary phone is mounted on the wall in the hall, so there is no privacy. Story 167. Some children are sheltered from the internet. I have not met a child who is not on a phone. Typical iPad kid. Story 168. We were taught right from wrong and how to take care of ourselves, and we stayed out of trouble while enjoying our freedom. Story 169. Fighting with your siblings over the family computer because it was your turn to play Club Penguin. Story 170. We did not always know the answers. We had the internet, but it was not in our pockets. In the moment, we could not just ask Siri whether dogs can eat carrots. We had to wait to get online, go to the library, or ask someone more knowledgeable. There was no constant influx of news, and fact-checking required more effort. If you got lost without a map, you had to ask a stranger for directions. Story 171. I was bored, so I read for entertainment, invented games, and ran around. Story 172. I only see children outside after school lets out. I rarely see them playing in the front yard. Story 173. I played outside without supervision. I rode my bike all over town and never told my parents where I was going. My friends and I would decide to ride to the arcade, the pizza joint, the convenience store, or anywhere else, and we would just go without permission or even a heads up. Story 174. I enjoy going into the woods, playing in trees and discovering paths. I feel the media has done a thorough job of frightening parents. Story 175. We played outside with neighborhood kids until we dropped from exhaustion. Story 176. Telephone internet at 1,200 and 2,400 bits per second. Trying to download files from a bulletin board system that took 90 minutes of redialing to connect, only to have someone pick up the line when the download was almost complete because the transfer protocol did not support resume. Protocols included X modem, Y modem, and Z modem. I can still hear the screeching sound of the modems negotiating a connection. Story 177. Having to take apart the technology in toys to fix or modify them. Story 178. In the packed arcade, placing quarters on the game signal that you were next in line. Story 179. Pox parties. Come one, come all, and infect your child with chickenpox. This is how I got it. Story 180. Riding in the back of a pickup and riding in the back seat standing on the hump in the middle. Walking to school alone, even with a foot of snow on the ground. I did this when I was 6 or 7 years old. Not that it was okay, but there you have it. Getting spanked with a wooden spoon or paddle. Story 181. You would call your friend's house to talk and make small talk with their parents or siblings, depending on who answered. Then your friend would yell, "Mom, I got it." Hang up, and wait for the click so you could talk. Story 182. We spent more time using our imaginations. It was not this constant barrage of information. We were left unsupervised far more than the children I know today. I learned many lessons about self-sufficiency by getting in over my head when left unsupervised. Story 183. Going over to a friend's house to use the computer together. Story 184. You spend your entire allowance at the local arcade trying to beat every level in a game and earn that coveted spot on the public leaderboard. Story 185. Hearing the R, N, and F words every minute. Story 186. We just wandered. My friends and I met up somewhere and went for a ramble through the woods. There were no adults or supervision, and no phones, so we were unreachable. The only limit was my watch telling me it was time to go home. We came back for lunch, thanks, Mom, and then headed out again for the afternoon. Every day was a new adventure. Story 187. Don't be addicted to Sephora. If you keep using all those products, you will look 90, not 9. Get some vitamin D, wash your face, and call it a day. Story 188. Not having to worry about the internet being down for 3 minutes. Story 189. Being outside without contact with your parents and told to return home when the streetlights turn on. Story 190. Being left alone with no phone. You go to a park, and nobody knows where to find you until you decide to return. Story 191. Growing up around race cars is common for many generations. Get a few friends, some money and determination, and you can race a dirt car. Story 192. Suffering from easily preventable injuries, especially head injuries, because the parents were negligent about safety. Missing 30 to 40 days of school each year because the parents were chain smokers and the household air was toxic. Having your parents secretly listen to your phone calls because there were landlines and multiple household phones. Having a parent have a meltdown in the principal's office and the police not being called. Being assigned home economics for girls and shop class for boys. Story 193. Playing outside unsupervised for hours was awesome. We would be gone all day exploring the woods. Building forts, just total freedom. Kids these days are so much more structured. It seems kind of sad, to be honest. Story 194. We played outside and rode bikes everywhere because our parents were not going to act as chauffeurs. Story 195. Turning on the television, waiting for the tubes to warm up, adjusting the rabbit ears, and watching 3 channels. Story 196. Do not be sorry. I am old. I remember 8-track tapes as a kid. I probably did not know the name. Story 197. 1. The paddle hanging on the side of a teacher's desk. 2. Being 7 and having to supervise your teenage aunt while she is on a date. 3. Showing respect for your elders. 4. A polite man opening a door for a woman or an elderly person. 5. Marriage before having children. 6. Birthday parties at McDonald's and meeting Ronald McDonald. 7. Feeling safe. Story 198. Children's television shows used to be much better. Even children from Generation Z had better shows than those available today. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.